Initially, I thought, well, I can just send my agent to interview you on Slack. But then I realized, well, why does my agent have to interview you? Why don't we just have my agent talk to your agent? Okay, we are talking about meta skills for OpenClaw today.
I think we briefly mentioned that in the previous podcast. It's going to be interesting to actually dive in and show the audience where we get the concept, how we developed it, and how we are using it.
Initially, you were just using OpenClaw.
Mm-hmm.
What changed?
No, originally I was using Cloud Code.
Yes. Yeah.
Before OpenClaw.
And so this whole concept of meta skills is born out of the extra challenges that arise when you go from one person and the agent as a pair to one person plus someone else's agent plus another person. And if we experience this just with the two of us, it implies there's going to be much more complexity for companies that are trying to do this. So what specifically got challenging when the company went from Lee plus his agent to then all of a sudden Edmund's agent also as an actor inside the company?
This common myth that people are discussing, which is AI seems like increased everyone's productivity by 10x, 100x, but no organizations actually saw the same amount of productivity improvement, at least not at the same magnitude. And I think the bottleneck is actually the alignment, because if you're just working with your own agent, you just need to figure out your own workflow, and everyone has their own workflow. So you can increase your own workflow's productivity by 100x, but your workflow doesn't equal to other people's workflow. So your way or your agent's way to do certain things doesn't apply to someone else's workflow at all. And you still need to bring humans together to drive the alignment, to make sure they're on the same page, to move things forward. So the biggest unlock now becomes, how can we avoid that human alignment? Can we make the agents drive the alignment by themselves? Now I'm thinking about this because last year when I was experimenting with using Claude Code as my personal assistant, the strongest argument of using Claude Code is like it's actually flexible. So all of the AI workflow or AI assistant apps out there, they're trying to fit you into a static workflow that the founders of the company envision, because everyone has their own workflows. If we design a workflow for everyone, not for like hundreds of thousands of users, just for the two of us, it still breaks. So the apps end up being very generic, very constrained on the things it can do. So Claude Code at the time was the biggest unlock. You can actually build custom flows and you can run on your own computer and connect to all of the different third-party tools or apps to get the context, and you build your own workflow on top of that. But fast forward to 2026, everyone has their own open cloud. Everyone's using their own agents. Now that same strengths, the flexibility of the Claude Code or of the customized agent now becoming the curse. Now, like all of the organizations, what they're saying internally is everyone has their own workflows. Everyone have their own agents working their own ways to pull the context, to perform actions. But on a company level, you still want everyone to follow the same process. So that's the thing that triggered us to think on this problem. How can we resolve that? Starting small, starting from driving alignment between our agents, just two of us, just Adam's claw and Lee's claw. We actually had a couple iterations on this. Originally, we had this idea of let's just baking all the difference between like our workflow into one scale. So on Adam's machine, let's do this. On Lee's machine, let's do this. But that just breaks immediately. Whenever I change a single settings on my laptop, it breaks. Now I have to push a change to our shared scale repo and ping Adam and say, hey, I just updated this scale. Make sure you update it. It's not sustainable, even if it's just two of us. And it's hard to imagine that will work for any organization.
And you were like specifically talking about non-technical workflows here.
Yes.
Do you think non-technical workflows, like, for example, a sales funnel or collaboration on some document that isn't code, do you think those are inherently harder to orchestrate between humans and agents because we haven't well defined how even humans should collaborate? There is no Git for documents. And to what extent is the hardness of this a function of the agents versus these domains being like inherently harder to define, and they're not being like historical tooling designed for even multiple humans working and diverging in parallel and then converging? There is no like merge of like slides, right? Or of a sales funnel or of inside a CRM.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Probably. But I think the biggest bottleneck is actually it's hard to validate as well. Like for a piece of business logic or a piece of program, the validation is the easiest part. Does it compile or does it or just errors out?
Yeah.
Right. And you can write tests to test business logic to make sure the business logic also follows the spec doc definitions. But for non-technical workflows, Like, what's the definition of a prospect? I guarantee you, even you within the same organization, there's probably 10 different definitions of what's a prospect.
If you don't believe us and you work at a company of, I don't know, more than 3 people, go ask the other people how many customers you currently have.
Yes.
And watch everyone start flailing around with different definitions of
Right. There's no silver bullet for that. People have to come together, make sure they are aligned on those basic definitions. But once those basic definitions are set, then you want to automate this. Then it comes to the power of the meta skills. I guess at this point, we should probably talk about the definition of the meta skills. I think you have a better, more concise version of what it is.
a skill. So definition in terms here, and I can let's use a crisp example of what kind of workflow we might be talking about here. So let's talk about a sales funnel. And we're talking about getting a prospect, someone who has, say, expressed interest or submitted a form or booked a sales call, to an activated and onboarded customer. Whatever your product, whatever your service, that's a funnel that you're getting people through. In this context, a skill is something that takes an action about this workflow. So it could be some combination of updating a CRM, checking information on call transcripts, validating information inside your database.
Actually, I think the meta skill isn't limited to non-technical flows.
Mm-hmm.
It can be your internal workflow. It can be anything. As long as you have a cadence or you have a sequence you want to follow, and the way to execute on that sequence require context that's pulled in from different places or in different way.
And so in generalized terms, a skill is a set of instructions to do a piece of work. Essentially, a playbook of how to get something done.
Correct.
And just like a playbook, it will have pointers to other stuff. Like imagine you've just joined a company and you need to do something, and someone has sent you what is probably a Notion doc of how to do it. That is essentially a skill. And so then a meta skill is the instructions that can create a bespoke version of a skill configured to you. So rather than a generic playbook that inherently has to leave things vague or have a bunch of if this then that statements inside it, it is a bespoke version that still captures the generalized spirit of the outcome, but has instructions that are unique to you.
Right. Remember all of those like install wizards when you grab a piece of pirated software from a sketchy website and then you open it and it pop ups a installer. The meta skill, I think in some ways, just that install wizard, like convert a piece of instructions into a to-do list for your own agent by prompting it to do a self-inspection and fill in the gaps. And instead of just having one static set of instructions and for all the environments.
Ultimately, what we're talking about here is if I have to just create a skill that does something inside the company, but you need to be able to use this skill, your agent needs to be able to use the skill. Making it extensible out the box is really hard. I have to either guess at your workflow or your sources of truth. Just because I'm using Granola, maybe you're using Fathom, but the skill just needs a call transcript. And even if we're both using the same tool, we're using it in different ways. Like we both use Notion, obviously, but how I manage my to-dos doesn't have to be the way you manage your to-do. And so you're faced with either forcing adherence to a shared workflow, which I think is the worst of all worlds.
Right. And also the way I fetch my emails is also different from your way of fetching your emails. Like one concrete example can be you have this catch-all skill that get the context from your email, get your context from your Slack. I have bespoke skills to get my credit card bill from my email. I get my calendar invitations from both my calendar and my email. So we have different ways to fetch the context, even though we share the same source of truth, which is our Notion, our calendar, and our email inbox. But we still have different ways to process those information. A concrete example will be like how we manage our clients.
And you know what it's like, actually? If you don't have a meta skill, creating a skill has the same problem of like the support docs for something like Salesforce. They're so generic because everyone's instance of Salesforce is configured differently. That's why inside a company, there are playbooks that humans at the company write that extend and also contradict the support docs of the actual thing. Because how we've set up our instance is different to how the generic out-the-box instance is configured. And that's the gap that a meta skill tries to bridge.
Right. That's such a good metaphor. That's also why Notion doesn't have a playbook.
Yeah. Like when you onboard into a company, whatever it is, Jira, Salesforce, there are bespoke, weird configurations that are arcane and unique to that company, which is why someone at some point has had to write a playbook of how to use that thing, even though it's just a generic piece of software.
Right.
So here's a tangible example, which is we use Notion as our CRM. We want to both be able to keep track of prospects moving through the pipeline, which results in a bunch of actions being taken. Stuff we have to configure in our product, follow-ups we have to send, billing, Stripe, MSAs to get signed, Slack notifications, call transcripts. There's a bunch of context, as anyone building software used by certainly other people, definitely other companies, knows there's a bunch of configuration to go from, yeah, I want this thing to I'm using it. And so I had a skill to update our CRM, but that very quickly becomes brittle because, I mean, you do onboardings, you do sales calls. Now what? You have to take my skill, but it doesn't work because it's reliant on my workflow and the context, the way it's structured in my emails. And so we needed to create a meta skill. My agent should be capable to go update the CRM and fetch the context it needs, but so should yours. And so should any arbitrary extra person in the company's agent as well, without forcing them to change how they like manage their own inbox or what they use to record their calls or how they actually go and interact with all the sources of context across the company.
As long as the agent follow the same definition of what's the prospect, when are they activated, what's the trigger to move them between stages. It's super brittle to build a catch-all skill that anticipates how people are getting their context fitted to the agents. But it's much easier to build a meta skill that just describes the concept and then instructs the agent to go figure it out and inspect its own environment and then pull the relevant context into itself and then use that to build a bespoke skill. How does the meta skill can help the organizations to gain productivities? Just like how it helped us, our agents to get aligned. It removes the brittle part of the human alignment. Those like 3 p.m. meetings asking, hey, how do you get your emails out of the inbox? Or where should I check for the context of this client? The meta skill teaches the agent to create a bespoke skill for itself, the context in as needed, and raise questions if it doesn't have an answer. And the result is just like a skill that is aligned with the bigger picture, but also out-of-box usable and also easier to maintain. If you need to change the definition of the client or definition of the stage of the client, you just change the meta skill and just tell everyone to reinstall the meta skill. And that's the end of the story. Or if you change your own setup, if you're changing your own like agent's environment, if you have access to a meta skill, you don't need to go back and change all their skills. You just reinstall the meta skills and then everything back to working.
Yeah, it's like if you were managing a sales team, it wouldn't actually matter where they went to click buttons to get information. It would matter that they're filling out the right fields in your CRM. And it ultimately wouldn't matter if they were scribbling down notes in a journal while talking to a prospect versus if they were using a call transcriber versus if they were typing up notes into their notes app. What would matter is that that context then went into the correct place. And so a playbook that had a series of if-else statements saying, if you write in a journal, do this. If you use a call recorder, use this. That would be preposterous. But unfortunately, that's how most skills work if you don't create a meta skill. And one interesting emergent property of this is the agents can teach them to each other. And so this might be an interesting point to actually show this in practice, which is if the skill isn't a brittle, very bespoke skill, if it is generalizable and a meta skill that has the inherent concept of a wizard to install itself baked into the skill, well, actually, one agent can hold the other agent's hand through installing it.
So you build an interviewer skill.
It seemed like the most sensible way to do this. When I imagined this, I thought, my agent doesn't have the context of your setup. Initially, I thought, well, I can just send my agent to interview you on Slack. But then I realized, well, why does my agent have to interview you? Why don't we just have my agent talk to your agent and ask it the right questions with the context of the skill it's trying to install to gather the right context to create the skill, and then it can just hand your agent the actual skill. So what we've done is we've left our open clause to their own devices to set this skill up for you. And what this skill does for me is it updates our CRM all the way from a prospect to an actually onboarded customer, which, as you can imagine, requires a lot of configuration and fetching of context that's unique to me, how I have my inbox set up, how I use Slack, what I use to record my calls, and where this information gets stored. And what we have here is a conversation initially kicked off by me, but where I'm tagging in at the earliest opportunity, my agent, which is called Lobster, talking to Lee's Claw, which is your agent, and together they're going to work through this to actually install it. And like, we are not participating in this conversation. I'm triggering the conversation in Slack, in a channel that just has the 4 of us in it, the 4 of us being us 2 and our respective open clause. And they hopefully will have figured this out amongst themselves to install it. This is the conversation between my claw and your claw, where we're attempting to use the meta skill to create a bespoke version of our CRM activation skill inside your open claw.
Nice.
And so the first thing my claw is doing is figuring out if we're using the same system of record and using it in the same way. And so it's checking to see, do you use the same Notion databases that it's been saving this information into? And are you accessing Notion in the same way? Are you using the API or are you using some other means to go in and update it?
Yeah, this is super smart. There could already be divergence on this step alone. And this is given that we both use Notion as our source of truth, but our agent had different ways to access it. Let's see.
I like this. I think this is high taste when it's saying, do you have a database where action items get logged? Because it's totally plausible. That's something that we might have one shared one. You might have your own divergent one as well. It's asking for the database IDs so that it can actually help you plumb this into your own system if you have a divergent way of tracking these things.
Oh yeah, this is super cool. A clause confirming that we are using the same CRM. Nice. It already called out that I have my personal task DB and at the same time job pipeline CRM has a to-do section.
And so it's noting a divergence of there could be a fork in the road of which of these two to-do databases we end up using.
Right. And also we have a different way to access the Notion. Who would have thought of that?
And it didn't actually show the key.
Yes. Good bot.
Yeah. Okay, then my response is saying that, yeah, we're both using the same CRM and it's double checking. Yeah, it's flagged two different to-do databases. Which one do you want to use? Or do you want some third option like using a Slack channel? And then now it's going into its next phase of questions, asking your claw, how does it access data in the production database? How does it get things from some of our other vendors as well? And this is completely generative. Like, is there any outreach monitoring or email sequencing?
So it's trying to cover all the cases.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Let's see my clause answer. Yeah, it correctly called out that the to-do DB is the right place. It shouldn't leave in my personal to-dos. It's more for my lead-only ops stuff.
Now that is opinionated. Is it correct?
It is correct because it has my context. It knows where's the best place to put those things. Now imagine capturing that in the generic scale.
If user has their own to-do database, do this. If not, do this other thing.
Yeah, and you don't even know if they have access to the Notion, or maybe they just use their own notepad to manage their to-dos, and they prefer that way. You just never know. People have their own workflows, and this is the way to get everyone on the same page without human in the loop.
Yeah, because people talk about agents of like increasing autonomy because it takes away tedium. But if you don't have things extensible like this, you have to restrict some autonomy by forcing people to do their work in a structured or like standardized way. But as long as the shared systems of record are correct and everyone uses them the same way, how you go about creating your own personal context before it makes it into a shared system of record should be completely up to you.
Yes.
All right, this is great. They're very genial with each other as well. They're always surprisingly polite to each other. This is super interesting. So it talks about where to post notifications on Slack. It's double checking who it's talking to, the identity of the bot, and it's double checking business logic about who to route to-dos between, which is really interesting because your agent will have some context about areas of ownership you have. It might even have richer and more nuanced details about that than my agent does. So now they should, in theory, be able to collaborate to make sure that there's really robust business logic that handles all these cases. And it's already called out a potential collision that your agent has what we know to be a deprecated version of this skill. And let's see how they now handle this, as it's essentially trying to install something that ought to, in practice, overwrite this.
Let's see. So it says there's no separate ops alerts channel. Skip the select proposal step directly to the to-do DB. Leave reviews from Notion, which is correct. I prefer to not review them on Slack. If a task is assigned to me, I would rather it to leave on Notion, and I will review on Notion. My agent made a high-taste judgment call because it has the context of myself.
This is like malt book, but it's boring. But also it's real.
Yes.
And so the thing I'm really interested in is how they handle this collision. This is super interesting. They've basically arrived at kind of merging an existing skill with this incoming skill.
Yeah, it correctly called out that there's a existing skill running daily and also acknowledges there are gaps in the existing skill and called out that the bespoke version should layer on top. Use the same pipeline scope, use the same Notion log pattern, but add the to-do DB rights for the persistent blocker tracking. It will take us at least another 30 minutes to go over the skills and make the edits, but the agent is doing it by themselves.
It's like doing a diff between these two things. And it's high taste, like it's not repeating itself.
Yes.
Okay, now this is my agent wrapping things up. This is an incredibly good question. One last thing, is there anything about your environment I haven't asked about that you think would affect how this skill runs? That is the kind of question any good PM would ask at the end of discovery.
Which checks out. It's your call.
At the end of any product discovery call, I'd always go, is there anything about this topic I didn't ask you that I should have? And to be clear, I haven't hard coded that into my claw or the skill, but it is correctly asking a good question at the end.
That is wild.
That is actually kind of spooky.
Your agent's always listening, always learning.
Let's see what your one said in response. This is really cool. It's found the boundaries where it shouldn't operate, which is correct. This is a skill just about activation. So it's correctly saying for any already onboarded customers, I'm not going to touch that. We happen to know that we're building a separate skill to handle that, but it didn't need that context to figure out the boundaries of, these are like subtle edge cases of the interplay between a status and a property on a card in Notion that it's correctly working.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I didn't read this piece of response before we hop on the call, and it is very high taste. It's calling out a potential discrepancy and it's calling out the boundaries of the skill. Damn.
How long do you think this would have taken us to do between ourselves?
30 minutes to an hour at least.
And now my claw is now creating the skill for your claw, which makes sense because my claw has my version of the skill in its context. It has full access to that, any other skills that might point to, and it is writing Lee's claw's version of it and sharing it with your claw once it completed that. And it's documented the changes it's made from my version of it. And yeah, it's like explained all it's working. All of this is traceable. It's been like annotating what it's learning as it goes along. So we can always go back and look at this. We've basically just thrown them together, let them figure it out, and they've now created a version of the skill that works for you.
Beautiful. Yeah, now our agents are fully aligned. And tomorrow, when the skill runs, I know our agents are following the same workflow. They are fully aligned, and there's no discrepancies between our workflows, and we can all sleep better. And this also saves both of us at least 30 minutes to an hour.
For companies trying to put this into practice, it seems like one of the challenging things is actually creating crisp definitions of your own internal business logic. And so it feels like companies that the humans can't agree on shit together are going to pay an even bigger penalty and tax in this world, because if you can't create some shared definition of things and agree on them, you can't unlock the full value of having these meta skills and having agents be able to create localized, extensible versions of them for themselves.
Definitely. For organizations that actually spend time and effort, have clear definition of their workflows, this will be a huge unlock. All you need to do is just define this skill once, define your SLP into a clear stated skill, and with instructions to tell the agent to figure out and install the skill into its own workspace. And then everyone will share the same workflow, and it will be much easier to write as well. It will be much easier to write a meta skill than writing a catch-all skill that predict all the edge cases. You can actually write the skill in the way that's invented for, which is encapsulate the piece of logic to get things done without thinking about all the edge cases. Skills is not a place for stuffing in a bunch of if-elses. It's for describing a workflow and leave the rest of the plumbing to the agents themselves.
It's declarative rather than procedural. And let the agents do what they're good at, which is figuring out the procedure between themselves, rather than you creating a fantasy choose your own adventure procedure of if you do this, then do that, and then do this, and then move it on. Do what you're good at, which is defining the actual domain-specific logic of your company, but then just express that as a meta skill and let the agents talk to themselves to figure out the actual procedure on a per person basis.
Yes.